Was the Boston Massacre really a massacre? Well, I guess to answer that question, you would have to look at what the definition of a massacre is. To me, when you look up what a massacre is, it means that a large group of people were injured, possibly dead, because of some event that took place. So if you look objectively, I guess, at the Boston Massacre and look at the facts of what happened, it's from my understanding that in the city of Boston there was a British soldier at the tax collector's house building, where his place of work, and he was there representing the British government, which was in charge of the city at that point, making sure that things were okay at the tax collector's building. Now, a lot of people didn't like paying their taxes, but I guess that's a whole different story. People that lived in the city of Boston, there were different groups of people, and some of them were starting to think that they needed to get their freedom from British rule. They didn't like the laws and things that Britain was imposing upon them. And this British soldier standing out in front of that counting house, that tax collector's building, represented that for them. So they start doing what people will do sometimes. They start taunting, they start picking up little rocks, little bits of ice, and kind of teasing him, if you will. More and more people see this happening, and they gather in, right? And then the British soldier isn't feeling entirely comfortable, so another group of soldiers come to kind of back him up, right? And meanwhile, there are more and more people that are fighting, that are thinking that they need to break with England, that are starting to come over. And before you know it, you have a large gathering of people. Well, as what happens, what I call a mob mentality, when a bunch of people get together, they all kind of get crazy together. And more things start happening, and more rocks are being thrown, and chunks of ice and stuff like that. And before you know it, a soldier thinks he hears the word fire, and he shoots. And when the smoke clears and all this craziness of all these people running around and things flying in the air and that sort of thing, there are wounded people laying on the ground, and the majority of them are colonists. Now, it's my understanding that there were probably, I believe, I would have to double check my facts, but I want to say less than 10. So when you're thinking of, is that a massacre? I mean, I don't want to minimize anybody's life. Any life that is lost is important. However, 10 people, is that a massacre? I don't know. But what happens then is the Sons of Liberty grab onto this story, this happening in Boston, and a man named Paul Revere, who was a part of this group, the Sons of Liberty, decides to make an engraving, which is an illustration, that's the way they did it back then, of what happened at this place in Boston. And he made a picture, and of course he had British soldiers. The way he showed it was British soldiers firing on a group of colonists, right? And all the people laying in the foreground that are bleeding are colonists. Now keep in mind, during the 18th century, the people that were educated, the majority of them were from the rich families. And when the picture got printed into newspapers, a lot of people weren't able to read. They see that picture, what are they going to think? They're going to think that British soldiers are firing on poor, unarmed colonists. And the reason why, if you think about that, why would Paul Revere do that? He is trying to drum up interest and support for the Sons of Liberty. And when the uneducated see that, they see the bleeding, all of a sudden that becomes a topic of conversation. Now keep in mind that news traveled very slowly in the colonies, but when this picture gets out and more people start to do that, or start to see it, you get more and more thinking. So what's going to happen for people that are thinking about pulling and breaking away from England? Just what you're thinking. More and more people are in support of that, all because of that so-called massacre. So I guess it would be up to you to determine whether Boston Massacre would be the correct label for what happened in Boston.